Kia ora koutou. I'm Sean Davis, part of the team at Venture Taranaki, and you're joining us for our final Ahead of the Curve webinar brought to you by Venture Taranaki. Since lockdown, Venture Taranaki has taken over 5,000 COVID-19 inquiries and distributed over $1.2 million in enterprise support funding. The funding received is to be used towards supporting your business with professional advice, such as you'll be hearing today from Velocite. We're here for your business, and you can reach us through our website at business.taranaki.info. It's been 6 months to the day since we launched our first webinar, and to round out the series, we're delighted to have Grant McQuiod, the Director of Velocite, join us again to dive into the transition from uncertainty to the new rules of the business game. In this webinar, Grant will cover new learnings, responses, and skills required, the evolving rules of business from digital enablement to team wellbeing, and we'll finish with planning to reset for 2021. Just before we jump into the webinar, you can use the chat box down below. So this is where you can interact with all attendees and panel. And if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A box, write in your question, and Grant and I will get to them at the end of the webinar. Great, thanks. Over to you, Grant.
Thanks, Sean, and certainly welcome to the presentation, everyone. So what we're going to do today is just run through a slide deck. So you'll see the first slide, which we're talking through today, which is around the path for today. And we're going to cover off what we've seen and observed over the last 6 months, look through some business perspectives, talk about building resilience into your business, and how you actually navigate the way ahead in terms of what are the things you should be thinking about in your business to set yourself up for success as we get into 2021. And the starting point really around what did we observe. If you think about it, back in March, it was a time of complete uncertainty, and everyone was dealing with change at a phenomenal rate. And I really encourage business owners and the people on this webinar to reflect back on that time and actually take a good look at what you achieved and your ability to adapt and get things done. Too often in business, we don't look back and we don't actually go, we did a fantastic job dealing with a lot of change, and pat ourselves on the back, but also look at what were the learnings. What were the things, if this happened again, we would approach it in a different way. The second observation would be business resilience wasn't there, it didn't exist. So in a large number of SMEs, the ability to pay staff through a 3-month downturn, the ability to pay landlords, the ability to have reserves in place that enabled you to actually survive didn't exist. But you've got to give credit. The government came to the table. They may not have done a perfect job in some areas, but they certainly came to the table and enabled businesses to get through that resilience patch. The third thing is around the sense of community that developed. And what we observed was a real switch to people and well-being, caring not just for your team, but caring for your customers, your supply chain, and actually people taking a deeper interest in helping each other's businesses out. Next one was around new skills learned and actually reflecting on and celebrating the new skills learned. And there's the obvious ones like Zoom meetings like we're doing now, the ability to remote work with employees. It's something that some businesses have dabbled in, but a large number of businesses made a leap. And then the change in the actual operating environment. So if you're operating a trades-based business, all of a sudden you're dealing with no-touch environments or low-touch environments. You're having to set up contactless drop-off and pick-up, all these sorts of things. So there's a whole raft of new skills and new ways of working that were actually developed through this first period. The other thing that came to the fore is values became evident. And in the first seminar, we actually advocated that people reflect on their values and use their values for decision making. And what we saw as an outcome, if you think back what you read in the media, we saw both good and bad values, and we saw them from employers and employees and customer relationships. And the good was when employers and employees engaged in actually open dialogue, working together to go, how can we solve a problem? The bad was where you saw employers imposing change on employees without even having discussions. And the flip side, where you saw employees actually having situations where some people went, well, I don't want to work. I've got this government subsidy. And it took a bit for people to get their heads around that. But for the vast majority of people, their values came to the fore and the right behaviours came out, where people came together to get the right outcome for the business and the individual. So there's a lot of change, and I think it's important that people reflect back on that and what were their own learnings. And I'd actually encourage people to sit down at the conclusion of this webinar and just take 5 minutes to reflect on that. What were my learnings? What did I do well? What would I do differently again? It's a great learning experience. Moving forward, some perspectives around business and just reflecting on business and how business functions. If you think about pre-COVID, the business world pretty much functioned in a fairly traditional cycle of you establish a business and you go through a startup and a growth phase where you're building your business, you're gathering new customers, adding team members. Then after a period of 2 or 3 years, you probably start consolidating your business. So you're in that maturity phase. Your business is going along nicely. You're making reasonable profits. You're putting money aside. And there's a level of comfort in how business operates through that phase. And then what happens is over time, you either enter a decline phase as your business becomes stale or a new growth phase as you come up with new ideas. It was a fairly traditional model. And the likes of a shock like COVID weren't something that people planned for and allowed for. So if we reflect on that and we go, what is the new normal? The reality is there's a lot more lumpiness in business now. If you look at COVID, you look over into the international markets, the reality is that you've got heading into winter, you've got outbreaks of COVID, you've got lockdowns in countries. These things all affect the supply chain and product that comes into New Zealand. So the new normal is there'll be challenges around getting product into New Zealand. There'll be challenges around selling product. And that'll be one of the biggest challenges where anyone relies on overseas supply chains. The other one is, if we use the Auckland lockdown as an example, the second lockdown, you can actually get a decline in business because a region has been shut down. And this could be the new normal for several years. We don't actually know if we will have another lockdown in New Zealand. And if we have another outbreak of COVID, will a lockdown occur in one region? Will it occur in multiple regions? So the new normal is to actually plan for unexpected things, plan for lumpiness in your business, but then run your business for positive outcomes. Look for the opportunities, but you need to have a downside plan. And I don't think it's something that business owners were too robust on in the past. My recommendation to everyone is you should have multiple scenarios, one of which includes downside, and what are your responses to that downside? Now, if we talk about the evolving rules of business, and this is quite a useful area we've been reflecting on. So pre-COVID, business had a really strong focus on growth. Where's my opportunity to grow? How can I enter new markets? How can I bring on new team members? So there was a strong focus on growth. Bank funding for growth was reasonably accessible for most businesses. So you could go to the bank and say, look, I'm looking to do ABC. There was a positive view of the world. You'd get some challenge. You might have to produce some information to support that, but access to funding wasn't too difficult. Businesses had digital business processes, but they'd have some manual steps. So examples would be the team on the job might be running manual job cards or timesheets, but then there'd be a digital invoicing process. So you'd have this elements of digital, elements of manual. Websites were a passive interaction with your customer. So more towards a brochure in the majority of cases. Yes, some online ordering. Customer confidence is a really interesting one. If you look at customer confidence, very trust-based in the past. So everyone trusted that if you're open and doing business, I'm happy to come into your environment and interact with you. Financial reserves were things that businesses did not have a lot of. They'd rely on their ability to borrow if they got into a bit of a hole. Supply chain, the whole principle of ordering something that you need to sell to provide to a customer was, I can probably get this from somewhere in New Zealand within 24 hours. So you had very much just-in-time ordering and low stock numbers. Team well-being, it was something that people kept a loose eye on, and so very reactive. If a business had a budget, they'd have one budget and one plan. They'd just have one scenario for the future. And if you think about debtor behavior, your customers would pay you when it suited them rather than in a really timely manner. So if one of your customers got into a bit of trouble, they'd stretch out payment terms and you'd just support them through that, but try and be proactive around collecting it. And I encourage people to look at that list and reflect on what were their behaviours before COVID. Now, if we look at a post-COVID environment and what I'm seeing from businesses now, the first one that I would challenge business owners to focus on is consolidation of your business. How can you build strength into your business under the new normal? And remember, the new normal was that lumpy graph with peaks and troughs. So the focus should be on consolidation first and growth opportunities second. Strengthen your business. The second one around bank funding. And perhaps one of the simplest examples I can give you is I've had conversations with a bank where pre-COVID they would lend 5 times what's called residual EBITDA. And think of residual EBITDA as your profit you've got left over after you've paid your term loan payments. That's kind of a simple way to explain it. And so pre-COVID, they'd lend 5 times that. Post-COVID, they'd lend 3 times that on a cash flow lend. Now, if you think about COVID, where it's reduced businesses' profitability and the bank's willingness to lend is only 3 times that reduced profit, not 5, then what you've got is you've got a situation where it's harder to borrow. And if it's harder to borrow, then your ability to do growth becomes a lot harder. So the challenge we put out there in front of businesses, if you want to access bank funding, you've got to have a good business plan to be clear on what you're trying to achieve, why and how. And you need to think about what money are you bringing to the table as well for this new opportunity. So if you need to borrow $500,000 to start a new opportunity, you need to think about where can you bring $250,000 to the table, and the bank will bring $250,000 to the table to enable you. The bank's role is not there to 100% fund things. It's there to be in a partnership with you to enable you to achieve an outcome. And under the new environment, more than ever, you've got to bring funds to the table in that partnership. And I'll talk about funding sources after this slide. Digital enablement. What we talk about there, where we talk about digital manual steps, we've been doing a lot of work with businesses to actually automate the process from where a customer comes in and you get an inquiry, and that inquiry becomes a quote, and that quote becomes something in your supply chain and in your manufacturing or production process that your workers are doing. And then out the other side, it becomes a finished product and an invoice. A lot of businesses have manual processes in amongst their software, and they have team members not even using software properly. And so that automating of those processes actually frees up time. So if you talk about consolidating your business, it frees up time for team members to then focus on customers, sales, growth. So it's an important area to really strengthen a business. And it's an area I think you'll find the government providing more support over the next year or two. Websites. A lot of businesses shifted their website from being passive to being something where customers could book online and buy online. And I think you'll find COVID accelerated that behavior very quickly. If you haven't moved down that path, you need to. Customer confidence. We talked about trust-based before. The change that's actually taken place is you prove to me that it's safe for me to come into your business environment. And despite things settling down, I wouldn't underestimate the need for some of your customers to be confident that if they come into your business environment, it's a safe and healthy environment. So there's been a definite shift there. Financial reserves. Every business should have financial reserves and the ability to fund their wages and their rent and their term loan payments for between a 3 to 6 month period. And if you go back to the top of this list where I talk about consolidation, I would be challenging businesses to actually spend the next 12 months consolidating their business, building financial reserves and strengthen so that they can actually ride through any peaks and troughs. Then if you find the peaks and troughs aren't happening, you've got a war chest of funds that enables you to go and access bank funding to do a growth strategy. But as I say, I would encourage you to build those reserves first and maybe take a consolidation strategy. Supply chain. Just think about what you've seen in the media recently. There was an article 2 or 3 weeks ago talking about bicycles and how the ability to get more bicycles into the country was actually going to be a big issue because of global supply chains and global demand as countries are locked down. Another example, I was talking to someone who brought a spa pool. Their delivery time has been shifted back 3 times now. So delivery was going to be September. It's now been pushed out October, then November, and they'll probably be lucky to get it before Christmas now. So that whole supply chain is a real issue. So in a business context, as a business owner, what I'd be looking at is going, if we had a lockdown like we had in Taranaki for 4 to 6 weeks and a second lockdown like was experienced in Auckland, do I have confidence that I've got enough stock in my business that I could ride through that lockdown and keep selling? Do I have confidence that I could switch suppliers? If Auckland had a lockdown, I can get supply out of Christchurch, or I can get it out of Wellington, or I can get it out of Wanganui. So that whole supply chain actually needs a look at so that you know you can ride through a lockdown again or a breakdown in supply coming into New Zealand. And this links back to that consolidation and building resilience into your business. Team wellbeing, very much an area to be proactive on and actually focus on how are your team. And as much as we'd like to look at it in a business world and go, look, my staff turn up, I'd like them to focus on work. I think it's important that you've got to recognise that people have other things going on in life. Do they have children away at university who Auckland went into a second lockdown? That impacts their mental state when they come to work. Do they have family who are living in an area where there's been a COVID outbreak in the last few days? The recent example in Taranaki was there was a port worker from Auckland in Taranaki who was identified with COVID. So if you've got an employee who has family working in that industry sector, they're going to be nervous and worried. Hence, being proactive about team wellbeing is important. The financial side, one budget, one plan, you should have multiple scenarios. By all means, have your growth scenario, but I think it's important also to have what if every 3 months we have a hole in our sales pipeline and we take a 50% hit. How will we deal with that? So multiple scenarios. Then the last one I really want to stress to businesses. One of the best behaviours that we actually saw as a result of COVID was people paid their bills on time. And it started at a government and a corporate level so if you think about the governments, councils, so local government, central government and corporates, there was a real switch to paying early or worst case paying on time. So businesses that were doing 60-day payment terms came back to paying 20th of the month following. Government, I think, switched to paying 10 days after invoice, or it might have been the 10th of the month. So this good behaviour actually means a lot of businesses are flush with cash at the moment because their debtors are paying so quickly. Now, I'd love to think that this behaviour would stay forever, but there's a risk that 6 or 12 months' time, debtor behaviour reverts back to normal, where people use their debtors as a source of cash for their business. And what that means is all of a sudden, the larger businesses push out to paying 60 days again and start controlling that cash flow. Your business, depending on its size, but you could have $100,000 more cash flow in your business than you realize right now, just because your debtors are paying earlier. And the challenge I'd put in front of you is have a look at your sales for September, have a look at your debtors for September, then go back 12 months and find a month where you had a similar level of sales and see what your debtors were 12 months ago. If your debtors 12 months ago were, say, 300,000 on the same level of sales as this month, and they're 200,000 now, that's $100,000 of cash flow you've got just because debtors are paying earlier. It's a really big warning sign that there could be a giant cash suck out of the economy if debtor behaviour goes back to what it used to be. And I can't emphasise that one enough. So if banks are a little bit harder to get money out of and you've got to sort of consolidate your business, where else might you look for funding? This is a diagram we put together several years ago for Taranaki Technology, and at the time it was focused very much on the technology sector. But down at the bottom of the funnel, when you start out in business, funding very much comes from yourself or friends and family, and that's your starting point. And you'll see on the right, we've got banks and government. So you'd put money on the table, friends and family would help, and the bank would come to the table and sit alongside you with some money. Above that, in the last few years, what's evolved is angel investors. And in Taranaki, we have launched Taranaki, which is an angel investor group. And you go to those groups with a plan and a requirement for funding, and they'll look to invest with you. But let's be clear, you need to have a very good plan, which includes how is growth going to be realised and how will that investor be able to exit the business. Alongside Angel, you have crowdfunding and accelerator. So these are online platforms. Examples are Snowball Effect, Kickstarter, Pledge Me. I'd encourage you to go and look at these online, and you'll actually see these are where businesses have put up a request for funding. The examples, medicinal marijuana, new technology, and they've put up the details of what they're looking for funding for, and they're inviting people to put funds into their business. Now, the interesting thing with these is a lot of it is what I'd call emotional investment. So if the investor, i.e. just any mum and dad person out there, any person, a young person with funds they're looking to put somewhere, they can go and invest small amounts into a business. They tend to be looking for something that they like the look of rather than an outright return. It tends to be emotionally driven. But there's an opportunity for businesses to access funding by accessing the wider community that's out there. Sitting above that, once you go through those phases, is venture capital. That's where high growth companies can access capital. Normally venture capital is focused on what we call expansion. So buying new plant and equipment, moving into new locations, expanding offshore. They're normally looking for fast growth, and IPO stands for listing on the share market or initial public offering, and private equity, same thing. They're looking for expansion capital to enable an already successful business to grow. So those are your funding sources. Alongside that, what's happened through COVID is the government's come to the table in a whole different way. And so you've seen construction with shovel-ready projects and housing projects. You've seen the tourism sector have access to funding. You've seen Maori business funding come to the table. There's a green investment fund for lower emissions energy infrastructure in New Zealand. The Provincial Growth Fund. There's business startup funding and research and development funding. And I'd encourage every business owner out there to keep an eye on the government websites and your news updates for what are the next government funding announcements. It's a genuine source of funding for a business to pursue a new idea as we restart the economy. So if you look at the challenge around the banks, if you can get some government funding, some crowdfunding or angel investor funding, friends and family funding, and put that alongside the bank funding, you'll go further. Important thing is under all of these, you need a plan. And if you want to be accessing someone else's money, you need to be able to show them what it's going to be used for and how it's going to enable your business to grow and change. So There is funding out there, but the basics of planning are really important. Opportunities. So on one hand, I'm saying, look, consolidate, make sure you strengthen your business by paying down debt, putting aside some money. But it's also important to recognise there is opportunity out there. And again, if I reflect back to the work we did early COVID, and we talked about in the first seminar, we talked about who is your customer's customer. So while you might look at the Taranaki Hospital rebuild or the Mount Messenger bypass or Tui decommissioning, and you might go, I'm not in that sector, it's possible that their employees are your customers. Their contractors are your customers. So these projects are really significant for Taranaki, and they create a real opportunity for all businesses to actually grow or at least retain customer base. So the types of projects that are already funded, we've got a list there. Potential projects, the councils have a significant investment in 3 waters. So the likes of your wastewater and drinking water, etc. WIT campus, and interestingly, great timing, there's an article again on this today. So there's a proposed spend on the WIT campus. And if you read comments from Neil Holdham on, it was either on LinkedIn or Facebook, he talked about, it would be great to get funding to have a secondary campus in the CBD and a nurses skills training campus around the hospital. So keep an eye on these things. This is where the region's looking for opportunities and funding. Social housing, there was the project over Marfell Way, and then the hydrogen project, which is ticking away and at some point should accelerate. Below that, there's some COVID-19 impacts that I don't think people have entirely got their heads around. So New Zealanders spend $9 billion on overseas travel each year. That $9 billion is going into housing renovation, spa pools, travelling around New Zealand, making my life more enjoyable within New Zealand. So there are definitely opportunities out there to promote what is unique about your business, but promote it from the context of enabling people to enjoy their lifestyle, enabling them to live in New Zealand in a way that they want to. Look for those opportunities. The other one, again, I was looking on the MTA, doing a little bit of research on some articles from MTA, and during COVID, you had the ability to not get your warrant of fitness renewed. And that ability ran from April to about October. MTA estimate there's about 500,000 vehicles that haven't had their warrant of fitness renewed. So if you put that in context, the motor mechanic, motor vehicle industry has all their normal warrant of fitnesses to do in October, November, December, plus there's 500,000 deferred warrant of fitnesses. So there's a big bubble of work there in the motor vehicle industry that needs to be addressed somehow. Again, that creates opportunity, that creates a flow of money that needs to happen within the region. The last one that I've got on there is the proposed Reserve Bank funding for lending program. I only actually heard about this a couple of days ago, even though there's been a few media articles around it. So it's important to keep an eye out for this. Now, what this one is, I talked before how the banks are reluctant to lend unless you put money on the table. The Reserve Bank funding for lending program, the idea there is the Reserve Bank will lend money to the major trading banks, which puts the major trading banks in a position to lend money to businesses. And so if this happens, and there's talk that the next OCR review is in November, it may come to the table then. If this happens, then what we should see, if it's designed well, it should be targeted at businesses. Now, there's no guarantee of that, but that's what I'd like to see. You'd see money flow to the banks, and the banks then be more enabled to lend to the business community. So if you see anything that talks about funding for lending, I'd encourage you to read those articles, because it becomes a potential opportunity to access more funding from the banking sector. So there's a view on some opportunities for people to reflect on. Okay, we talked about building resilience. I've touched on this a couple of times, and without a doubt, there's growth opportunities for businesses, but I still come back to you need to consolidate and strengthen your business first before you take a growth opportunity. So how do you consolidate and strengthen your business? Start off with the financial and planning aspect. So what is my plan for 2021? Will I grow? Will I consolidate? Or will I decline? And the way you plan for that is you look at who your customers are, and then you go a layer deeper and you look at who their customers are, because it's ultimately who your customers' customers are that will define what is your revenue growth opportunity. So we encourage you to have a look, start your plan by looking at your customers and your opportunities. Then look at where your cash goes after you make a profit. It's important to look at what you take out in drawings. Is your lifestyle based upon what you earned 2 years ago and last year, when it needs to be based upon what you will potentially earn this year? Do you need to buy assets to enable you to modernise or future-proof your business? Should you focus on paying down debt to build some more resilience? So really important. Too many people talk about sales ahead of profit. You should actually be talking about cash. Where's the cash left after you've paid all these drawings and loans off? Next one, what reserves do I have? Pre-COVID, businesses probably relied on their bank being able to extend them a bit of overdraft facility in short-term emergencies. I'd encourage you to make sure you have 3 months cash reserves as a minimum, maybe even 6 months. Now, when I say cash reserves, what I mean by that is the ability to access money in a crisis to get your business through a crisis. That might mean that you've got an overdraft facility. It might mean that you've got an unused term loan facility. You've got equity in your house that you can borrow against. It doesn't have to be cash under the mattress. But the point is you need to have a plan around where can I access reserves if I need them. And that just, the way I look at it, that's your downside scenario. If you know what your downside scenario is, you can now focus positively on the upside. If you haven't got a downside scenario, it's going to sit in the back of your mind at some point. Flexibility for major costs, again, a new behaviour out of COVID. Businesses are looking at their premises leases versus should they use a co-working space versus working from home. And if you think about it, let's say your business has a growth opportunity and you're going to add 3 or 4 employees. Do you need to expand your premises? Or could you actually have your 3 new, or your team working from home or using a co-working space like Manifold or Johnson's Corner? And so you need to challenge those costs and actually how you function as a business. Employees, if you're taking on new employees, should you think about whether you take on contractors? This is a trade-off between giving them certainty versus your business having flexibility. Should you think about process automation? So are there things you can automate in your business that actually mean that instead of taking on an employee, you can create some capacity? So you've got your existing employees have more time available to do other things. Then the other thing I wanted to touch on is exceptional years. In the past, I think there's been a strong focus on an exceptional year of, oh, well, let's take that out for lifestyle. The focus in the short term as a minimum, where you have a really good year, should be on debt reduction and investment to strengthen my business. Build that resilience into your business so that you can take advantage of growth opportunities. Lifestyle should be last on the list. It doesn't mean it's not important, but is your business strong? Last point on this page, every business owner should know their result before they even look at their monthly financials. So if you think about it, if we use the example of a trades-based business, are my boys or girls all busy through the month? Are they pre-booked? Will all the team actually be out on jobs? And you should be looking at that week to week. And if you know all your team are actually out working, you should always know that, look, if I've got 10 team members and I charge them out at $100 an hour and I've got 40 hours booked for the week, you should know that I'm going to hit my sales numbers for the week. Hence, when you get your financials, they should just confirm what you've already identified through the planning and organising of your team during the month. So, yeah, if anyone's waiting for their financials to know how they're going, you're not running your business the correct way, and you need to take a really hard look at how do I manage my people and what I'm selling. Okay, moving from financial to people. Through COVID, obviously it was a stressful situation for a lot of people. And as business owners, we had a lot to focus on. We had to focus on our customers, we had to focus on our staff, we had to focus on whether we'd make money to pay the bills. Could we make payroll next week? What will our business look like 3 months out? So there was a lot of ambiguity. Through that uncertainty, there's also a lot of communication going on in the media, which isn't always helpful, pointing out all the challenges that people are facing, pointing out good and bad business decisions. People became worried about physical distancing, social isolation, change in working hours. Do they have family members who are essential workers? All these things affected people's mental well-being and mental health. And it's really important going forward that we continue a real focus on communication, open and regular two-way communication with staff, understanding what stresses and pressures they have outside the workforce, and being a listening ear is important. Sometimes a problem shared is enough to make that problem move away. You've then got to focus on how you can get that team member to focus up, turn up to work, able to work effectively for you. But I'd encourage a real focus on understanding what's going on with your team so that you can get the best out of them every day when they're working for you. And that might mean that you introduce a bit of flexibility and recognise situations and actually say, look, how about you work in the evenings if your business can accommodate that? So try and find win-win outcomes that enable you to support people around you, because the mental health side of this will still exist. People will still have anxiety around what's going on a global scale, even though New Zealand might feel insulated from it at the moment. So people side, very important. Customers and suppliers. Do you understand what your customers want? And I use that example of the warrant of fitness deferral, right? So if people in the motor mechanic and the motor trade have thought about it, there's a bubble of work there. What are their customers going to need? What are your staff going to need? How are you encouraging loyalty to keep and retain those customers if you're going to be overworked through that period? For those businesses who have come out the other side of COVID and works may be lumpy, what are you doing to stay close to your customers, understand their needs, and meet those needs so that they stay loyal to you? Have you talked to your customers to actually understand what is important to them at the moment and what their requirements of your business might be over the next 6 to 12 months? The change, we talked about the change in people's behaviours. So if you think about it, if people can't travel, focus on the home, garden renovation. Travel within New Zealand has become more important. What opportunity does that create for your business? Video streaming had a huge uptake. Food delivery services suddenly became more significant. Mobile and online use, people learning online, shopping online, travelling domestically. So all these change behaviours means that other businesses are going to do well out of them. How can you make those businesses your customer? I've talked about supply chain earlier. The New Zealand alternatives. If you import a product, it's worth considering, could you source it in New Zealand? Could you approach a business in New Zealand to manufacture it? And it might be that you have that as your contingency plan, or it might be that you work collaboratively with another business to get your product made in New Zealand so that you've got a stronger supply chain. Managing payment terms. I've talked about debtors paying very promptly. You've got to consider what happens if that changes 6 to 12 months out. And the whole stock management. I've got one client who carries approximately 2 years worth of stock, and it's because they source their stock from overseas. And I've always challenged them around it. The reality is, in this current environment, it's been essential for them. And so you've got to look really hard at your business and go, how much stock do I need to carry? Or how much stock do I need to encourage my supplier to hold for me so that it's there if I need it? Moving on to what can you do from here to enable you to move forward? First one, and this is what we call the Velocity business purpose model. And when we sit down with a business, we always talk about what is your purpose? Why are you in business? And on the left, you'll see 6 hexagons, and they're around the reasons that people predominantly have a business. Now, you don't need to have all of these, but you may have several of them, or you may even have one. So, purpose. Why are you in business? What was your aspirational dream when you set up your business? Investment back into the business. So one of my objectives is to put money back into my business so it's got some resilience. Reward. I want to reward my employees. I want to reward the business owners. Protect. I want to build wealth away from my business so that I can sell my business and retire. Lifestyle. I want to have a motorhome or a boat or a batch or whatever your interest is. I want to be able to go tramping whenever I can. And that social good, putting back into the community. Now, this slide, I've deliberately shaded one side in grey and one side in red. Through this next 12 months, my view is the focus of many business owners should primarily be on purpose, investing back into their business, and social good, contributing to their community. The reward for employees or owners over and above how they're normally rewarded, that taking money out to build wealth away from your business and that lifestyle aspect, those should be secondary objectives. If you've got the ability and means, by all means, pursue those. But you should be starting on the left-hand side of this equation. And I'd challenge people looking ahead, reconnect with your purpose and when you look at that diagram, pick 1 or 2 things that resonate with you and then start to think about what is your objective within that 1 or 2 area. Then you focus on running a profitable business that enables you to achieve that outcome. If we look at how to move ahead, reaffirm your purpose and values. Set out a 12 to 18-month plan to help you navigate the lumps. Be flexible with that. Look for opportunities, and we've put a list of opportunities in an earlier slide, but keep an eye on the big announcements. You might look at large-scale stuff like Mount Messenger and the hospital build and go, I can't get work out of that, but your customers may well be getting work out of that. So look for opportunities. Build resilience, reduce debt, build up resources, build resilience in your people by looking after them. If you've got good staff, caring for them will keep them. Build resilience into your clients and customers. Give them confidence, understand what their needs are, give them confidence to come and interact with your business. Build resilience in your suppliers by openly discussing what your supply needs are, what are the implications for them in terms of getting supply when you need it. And as a business owner, stay informed. Actually proactively go out there and keep an eye on government announcements, industry announcements, the council announcements around the long-term plan, Venture Taranaki announcements. So be well informed around what's going on so that you can actually see where the opportunity is, thinking in the context of who is your customer's customer. So those are the 4 areas we'd encourage people to focus on as they look ahead. Sean, I'll just pass over to see if there's any questions that we want to deal with, and then I'll just close off with sort of a comment on some local support.
Yeah, cool. I don't have too many questions just because you've been so thorough, but we've got 2 here. So what are some key indicators it's time to walk away from a business?
Okay, and we've actually had to deal with this with a business that came to us for some advice. The first one is if you are having to put money into your business on a regular basis to enable it to meet wages or rent or anything like that, that's a signal that your business is not viable. You're having to tip money in to meet bills. Second one, if you're not able to pay bills, be it rent, creditors, suppliers, then you've got an issue. Third one would be if your customer base has changed significantly. So let's imagine pre-COVID, you had a regular stream of customers coming through the door, and for some reason the market's changed significantly. People now do things online. Your business requires a customer to come in face-to-face. So if there's a fundamental shift in how people buy, and for some reason you can't respond to that, then that's a sign that you either need to pivot or change your business model, or you need to pull the pin. I do come back to the two biggest indicators are your tipping money in and your inability to pay suppliers and creditors. The earlier indicator is always sales, but most people don't spot that early enough. They normally don't feel it until they're tipping money into the business. So that's where your indicators are. If you're in that situation, you should start by actually getting advice on getting an independent person to sit down with you and talk about what are your options. And genuinely, if you have significant creditors and you keep tipping money in regularly, you should actually look to shut the doors and look to liquidate or shut down your business, but engage with your landlord, engage with your employees, engage with your suppliers through the process so that you close it down in an orderly way. The most important thing you can do for the benefit of everyone else is not to keep trading if your business is in trouble. Because if you keep trading, what you do is you keep getting supply from someone else, and eventually you get to a position where you run the risk of taking someone else's business down as well. So if your business is struggling, to me, your moral obligation is to look at it and make a decision early as to how will I access money to keep me going? How will I turn this around? Or how will I get out in an orderly manner so I don't take others down with me?
Great. And just one final question. So, a bit of a personal question, but as yourself as a business owner, what's a key learning that you've taken from this year, or something that's really stuck out for you?
It's an interesting one. Look, I guess for me, and there's two probably. One is that not enough businesses had resilience built into their business, which actually gave them the ability to get through this. And so for me, I think having a clear downside plan, which means if something goes wrong, I've got a plan, I pull it out of the bottom drawer and I execute it rather than getting stressed. And I think that was a really important tool that we brought to the table early, was having a downside plan, put it in the drawer, pull it out when you need it. And it meant that people could sleep at night. So having that downside plan is really important. The other key learning for me was it's actually all about people. And if I look at our business, our team really stepped up and they learned new behaviours, new tools. And as a result, our business was able to come to the table and provide solutions to clients. But it wasn't because of anything I or Paul did. It was because the entire team actually stepped up and went out and learned new things. And so to me, your team, it said a lot, but your team is your most important asset in your business. If you involve them in where you're going and how you're going to get there, then you'll be amazed at what they can bring to the table to help you grow and succeed as a business.
Great, cool. Well, yeah, that's the last of the questions. Do you want to wrap up where the find some support, and I'll hand back over to me.
So I just wanted to close by just for those who aren't too familiar with Velocity, letting you know we took a really strong focus through COVID of going, how can we make information available to business owners so they can self-service, and then when they need to, we'll support them along the way. So by all means, go to our website, have a look at some of the information that's on there. Like we have a four-pronged approach to helping businesses around planning, right? So we've got a growth program, which is for early stage businesses, and that's actually focused on people who are probably 500,000 to 1.5 million turnover, maybe even earlier in business, where we bring them together as a group and we actually help them as a group solve problems and opportunities to grow their business. We have a reshape program, which is focused on people who are probably around the 1 to 3 million turnover, where the business owner might be busy, moderately successful, but they're eyeball deep in everything and they want some help to actually set out a plan of how do I move forward. And we get alongside those business owners at that level and actually help them set out basic planning. At the transform level, what we actually focus on is businesses that are probably reasonably successful to very successful, 3 million plus turnover. And the business owner's probably looking, they might be older, they're looking at exit or succession planning, or they're looking at funding for expansion or a project. And so we run a growth, reshape and transform program to solve each of those problems. Alongside that, we also have an automation or business process improvement, which is how do you introduce technology into your business so that you can free up your people to focus on other things. And so if you're looking for how do I take a proactive step forward, by all means reach out to us around the growth, reshape, transform automation programs that we run. Look at the seminars that are on the right-hand side of the slide, and they're free. Come along and increase your knowledge so that you can actually plan for what's in front of you. Talk to Venture Taranaki. The Regional Business Partner Network provides good funding for businesses to actually enable them to access knowledge like ours, but also the capability of the entire business support community in Taranaki. So I'd really encourage people to take advantage of those tools and events and opportunities. Thanks, Sean.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, and also I really encourage to, especially everyone listening out there, to get along to those events. There's some really great topics there, and they'll be super helpful. Yeah, so that's it for End of the Curve. Thanks, Grant. It was a pleasure having you close us out for that. And I'll make sure to send out the recording to everyone. So everyone have a lovely day. Haere rā.